So I will formally introduce our next paper. It's titled Information Literacy from High School to University, Report of the Ontario School Library Impact Project. And I'm sorry, my clock is chiming in the background. And the paper's authors are Mary Cavanagh, Dianne Oberg, Heather Buchansky, Marc Kate Johnson-McGregor, and Sarah Roberts. So I'll mute now and let you all take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to start on behalf of our team, and I'll do the first part of the presentation, and then Heather will come in at the really interesting bits. Well, not that this isn't interesting, but this is the setting up. And I just want to acknowledge, I saw Marc is here, Dianne Oberg is here to participate in discussion and questions. So now I have the Heather, I'm going to ask Heather to advance this. Thank you, Heather. I'll just wave at you. So this is our research team. You can see Kate Johnson-McGregor is a high school librarian, Sarah Roberts from OLA. This project started with the Ontario Library Association. I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to this project in a moment, but these are our project team, and we've worked very hard over several years, and thank you all. Okay, next. So I was at a conference in Saskatchewan, and this is the little story of how this project started. Here are the goals to look at school libraries. I talked to Sheila Patterson from the OLA, and we were talking about research and practitioner research, and she said, you know, we really need help in doing research. Would you be interested in working with us on a research project? And I said, sure. And this project was top of mind and a priority for OLA. And I started with OLA, and we put together this research project with the other members of the team. And OLA had a very particular interest in looking at the bridge between school libraries and the contributions of school librarians and school library staff and their collections, and sort of demonstrating value. And the way we decided to look at that was demonstrating value over to the first-year university students. There was definitely a goal to create a study that could be replicated, and that was also in a way instructional, and the findings would definitely be used to support advocacy. Thanks, Heather. So our research questions: what information literacies do first-year Ontario University students have at the start of their careers, and how do first-year university students' experiences of IL, inquiry-based learning, and instruction via their high schools relate to their performance in their first year? Very ambitious questions, and it's very, very difficult, as all of you will understand, to draw lines. And in fact, it's impossible to draw straight lines. So our next slide. Our working assumption was that previous access to some aspect of secondary school library service, whether that is space, collections, people, professionally trained librarians, or school librarians with an education background, or any other staff, that would make a difference in the first-year university students' experience. Next. So our project team was our core team, who are authors on this paper, and we also had an advisory committee of school librarians and academic librarians from university, again, all coming through the Ontario Library Association networks. And they helped us in terms of articulating questions and talking about priorities. They looked at the instrument, they made suggestions, and were consulted along the way. We also benefited from the Toronto's Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, having a team of master's students who were really excellent on data analysis, and we thank them for their support. Next. So one of the big challenges was to identify university partners, and working with OLA, the unfortunate timing that came up was just as the Ontario academic libraries were delivering or implementing their integrated library system, the Collaborative Futures Project, for those of you in Ontario, through the Scholars Portal, we were trying to recruit university partners. So we also spent a lot of time thinking about trying to get partners from various regions and perspectives in the Ontario University system. So we looked at geographic distribution, size. We were trying to just get as wide a spread as possible. This is a very small study, and it was designed to be small and more of a demonstration, very much a preliminary. Our university partners, University of Toronto, University of Windsor, and Nipissing University. And I see Laura Sinclair is here from Nipissing. I don't know if someone is here from University of Windsor, and Heather Buchansky, my co-presenter, is here from the University of Toronto, and there may be others. So Nipissing is in Northern Ontario, small university, Windsor in the south, much more of a regional perspective, and University of Toronto. So in each of those cases, there were academic librarians who were basically our intermediaries to accessing the students. Next slide. Oh, sorry, there we go. Gaps from the literature. So this is really Dianne Oberg's expertise. She was the subject matter expert on our team. But we know, and OLA had already done a little bit of work on this, the thinking is fewer staff, fewer resources in school libraries, closures and reductions in funding lead to students who have much less expertise and awareness and instruction on information literacy. Definitely a lack of research on long-term school library, the impacts over time. And we were trying to do that a little bit in this design in terms of dealing with first-year university students. And of course, the 21st century competencies that have evolved and continue to evolve. And I would say we should be adding post-pandemic competencies or during pandemic competencies in critical learning, and the role of the library and librarian. All of those gaps are well identified, I think, in the literature. Next, Heather. In terms of the literature review from the high school side, this is, again, school librarians do make a difference. We know that they make a difference. There's a study by, it's Ken Haycock in the Connecting British Columbia that having, the summary is having access to school libraries and school library staff does make a difference. Now, what that difference is, how that difference is parsed, how it translates over time, those are some of the gaps. And if we go ahead to the literature from the university side, next slide. Heidi, there's a paper here on a project you worked on, information literacy proficiency, 21st century competencies. Generally, what we took away, and this is much more my takeaway perhaps than other members of our team, is that the learning that students have in the secondary system does not translate well into necessarily into an experience in university. And so, and certainly that's part of what we found in our findings, that as much as they might have learned skills and competencies and the models are quite different, the translation into first year is not necessarily there. And then there's the larger role of what is the role, and do they have access to academic librarians and instruction? And that's very uneven. Next slide. So we don't expect you to read this at all. This is our attempt to map two very, very different frameworks onto one representation. So we looked at the Ontario model, the inquiry model in the secondary system, and mapped it very roughly onto the ACRL framework. And we came up with these four quadrants. And this was actually the Monk students did a lot of work on this, into these four themes: exploring, investigating, creating, and processing. And we organized our instrument, our survey instrument, in that way under those four themes, and questions in that way. you can, it doesn't map well, it doesn't map neatly at all, but it was one way to try to bring them together. Next slide. So yes, these are our frameworks, the Ontario Model of Inquiry. We have links to a lot more of the documentation in the long abstract, and Heather will be giving you a link to the OLA site at the end. We did test the instruments. The survey design was to give students in the fall semester a survey about their experience to get them to, I'm already going to run over my time, a survey in the fall, and then to survey them again in the winter after they've had some instruction. That was the design. Because of COVID, it did not work that way. Next slide, Heather. So the number of respondents from Nipissing, Toronto, and Windsor in the fall questionnaire is listed here. And we had several questions where there were open-ended responses, and this just gives you the data. Next slide. And pretty soon I'm going to turn it over to Heather. There we go.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Mary. That's great. So this was a question that was asked of the students who responded. Did you receive library instruction from a teacher librarian in your last year of high school? So across the 3 institutions, 36 said yes and 85 said no. And this question that arises for us looking at it is then how much library instruction or information literacy did high school students experience, and what does that mean for academic librarians with instructional roles in this case? This slide summarizes the comments that were received from the students who reported having a teacher librarian and instruction in their last year of high school. So some of the more common responses or themes are noted above. One of the more common was that they learned to find reliable sources, how to use databases and library catalogs, and how to avoid plagiarizing, and how to cite sources. They valued the library as a quiet space for study and as a resource for completing assignments and projects, and as a source of materials related to personal interests. And they also found librarians to be helpful and friendly. And they also noted that teachers were helpful with library-related activities as well. There were a few respondents who reported, I guess, less positive experiences that are noted on the right-hand side, saying that they never really used the library for help, or that they were very boring but helpful to learn. I'm going to take that more as a neutral comment in that case. So we also conducted one-on-one interviews with a small group of 4 first-year students at the University of Toronto. They all attended publicly funded high schools in Ontario the previous year, and they were from different school boards from across the province. Now, the pandemic also affected our plans for interviewing as it occurred at the end of winter 2020 semester, so March 2020, as we had hoped to interview some library staff as well, but we didn't get to that. However, we want to give credit where credit is due for the PGI students for conducting and transcribing these interviews right when COVID-19 happened, and the willing student participants who continued to take part in the interviews that we then moved online. So with that in mind, the interviewers asked the students if they had developed any new strategies to deal with finding and using information at university. And the strategies suggested were focused more on the finding rather than the using of information, as the posted quote above notes. So you can take a moment to read that. Just when I use databases, my strategy is just to write the keywords, and if you go online or if you click the keyboard for writing, you can write words and it'll just highlight the words you'll specifically need. And they note the Control F feature and that their mom taught them. And here's another example from the same question of developing new strategies related to finding and using information sources at university. Once again, it's more focused on the finding and then the using. The interviewer's last question asked students to identify some of the bigger or the biggest challenges that they had encountered with finding and using information at university. And common themes in this case were that there was a lot of information and that it was very overwhelming. And then final comments and thoughts. At the conclusion of the interview, students were asked if they had any other comments that they wanted to add. Now, 2 students did take this opportunity to comment about their high school experience in particular. And above is one example of what the student said about their high school experience and having been taught databases in the last week of high school. And that teachers were fine with anything, any sort of sources that could be used. That they would feel like they would be more prepared in university if they were required to have used better sources. So in terms of future directions from this study, we realized that librarians as information professionals can both serve as mediators, translators, or intermediaries who can help bridge these information literacy gaps, but often the role is not recognized or not understood. And that there are partnerships and programming that do exist between secondary and post-secondary librarians and libraries in Ontario. So it does suggest that there are ways in which these 2 areas can support students in the transition from high school to university. It's always good to know what's happening on either end of the student's learning spectrum. So in conclusion, our preliminary findings from this first Ontario School Library Impact Project questionnaire appears consistent with findings from other larger in-depth studies, such as those conducted by Project Information Literacy. And that first-year university students are challenged by the demands of post-secondary course research assignments. These are the assignments for which students have to select a topic, define a focus, and locate and use resources from a large and complex information environment. And unfortunately, many Ontario students entering post-secondary education have had no or very little or limited information literacy experiences and direct instruction during their high school years. And that the fact that the situation is multifaceted, an issue facing both school libraries and librarians and academic librarians, as well as the instructional partners involved. So on that light note, we're happy to take any questions, and I'm just going to put the link in the chat when I stop sharing my screen.